It's time for more manifesting original rich bitch experiences. Each week, we're talking travel, wellness, and millennial musings with a level of refinement. What level? It fucking depends. I'm your host, Ava Bilkey. Hey guys. Today I think we should have a conversation about burnout. And we're going to have a conversation about burnout because that's where I'm currently at. I am burnt the fuck out. And it's so incredibly frustrating to feel this way because I like to think that I try not to feel this way. I like to think that I have put up boundaries in my life. I like to think that I've created lifestyle changes and choices that would protect me from a state of burnout. But it's become apparent that maybe that's not the case. So I figured we could talk about this because maybe you are feeling this way too. Maybe you're burnt out. If you're not burnt out right now, maybe you've been burnt out recently, or maybe you feel like you've been grinding to the point of that tipping point. And I think we should get into it. Let's start with the definition of burnout. What is it? So, according to the World Health Organization, burnout is a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And when I read that, I was like, how rude, accusing me of not properly managing my stress. But maybe there's something to that. Burnout is also referred to as an occupational phenomenon, which I find very fascinating because I would also argue that burnout is really just a state of the reality of life in 2023 phenomenon, with the way we use and relate to technology and the internet and being completely always fully connected. I think that spans a world outside of work for most people. And burnout is signified by feelings of complete exhaustion, physical and mental overwhelm, and fatigue. Okay? So that's what we're currently defining burnout as. I don't know about you, but using this definition, I've been burnt out as an adult for as long as I can remember. I used to believe that burnout was avoidable or preventable, or the fact that I feel this way is my fault. And I have several examples from the past 4 years. I can actually give you one example per year of moments that I believe led to feeling this way and also what I learned from them. But before we get into that, I think that I've really changed my mind on this piece about burnout being preventable or avoidable. I don't think that's the case. I think that burnout is a part of reality, especially for millennials, especially for Gen Z, and everyone coming afterwards. I think it's a reality of life. And so rather than trying to, or rather than speaking about burnout in the sense of like avoiding it or preventing it, I think it's healthier at this point to actually speak about burnout from the perspective of living with burnout and what we can learn from burnout to ultimately minimize the impact that burnout has on us moving forward. I also used to believe that burnout was only caused or created by living out of alignment. And what I mean by that is looking at your job or looking at your life situation and saying, the reason why I'm burnt out is because clearly this is just the wrong job for me. Or like, clearly I'm just not doing the right thing. Like, I'm living out of alignment. And over the last 2 years, I've actually learned that even when you are doing things that are more aligned to who you are and what you want out of life, you can still reach that point of burnout. So, what we do with that information is then say, okay, well, what can I learn from this? Because I believe that everything we experience is a teachable moment. If you're feeling like you are so exhausted, burnt out, like void of personality, just low energy, that is that's a difficult place to be in, but you're not alone. That's how I feel right now, guys. I thought it could be interesting to reflect on moments of unaligned and aligned burnout that I've had in the last handful of years, and specifically what those moments have taught me and how to move forward from them having this awareness. So, unaligned burnout is what I would describe as working in or existing in environments that you know don't support you. They're not supportive of your goals, your lifestyle, your general life direction, but you found yourself in these positions based off of perhaps necessity or based off of doing things that you thought you should do, following the societal shoulds, and ending up in situations that don't feel good. So, one of my bigger moments of burnout in the unaligned setting is back in 2020. And I think we all probably have one of these stories, but let's take it back to 2020. In March of 2020, I was working what I thought was my dream job. I was a director of social media for a national lifestyle brand. And I had worked the last 9 years. I spent the last 9 years climbing the corporate ladder to ultimately reach this position. I wanted this specific title. I thought it was the best thing that I could do. And I thought that once I had that, I would feel successful. I would feel a sense of accomplishment. I would feel contentment. That's what I thought. After taking on this role that I thought would bring me everything I wanted, I think 3 or 4 weeks later, the pandemic set in. And working in social media for a lifestyle brand at the time that had retail brick and mortar locations that were impacted by COVID closures sent this organization into an absolute shitstorm, as I'm sure it did most brick and mortar organizations. And so social media became the only way that this company could truly communicate information to its customers about the impact of COVID on the business. And what that looked like for myself and for my team was that we were working 14 to 16-hour days for what felt like forever. I think it was probably a stretch of maybe 6 to 8 weeks at a time that we were really in this state of emergency, if you will. And the other thing that was happening is we were working out of a state of fear, right? Because nobody knew what was going to happen to their jobs. Everyone was very willing to work the overtime because, well, you couldn't leave the house for one. Everyone was afraid. We didn't know how this would impact us, this virus. So, after 6 or 8 weeks of just horrible hours, the fatigue really started to set in. And the adrenaline of that really fight or flight emergency situation wore away. And this is when I started to realize that this could be a much longer term situation. And it was. We saw this go on for months and months. We went through at least 2 rounds of opening and closing of these brick and mortar properties in 2020 alone. And during this time, I just felt like a total shell of a human being. So when we talk about fatigue, it's like fatigue to the point where you can't even get out of bed. Fatigue to the point where you'll spend all day working and then after work, you have literally nothing else to give. No energy to communicate to friends or family members, or energy to dedicate to taking care of yourself. Like a total drain of the soul, really. And so during this time, I started to think more seriously about what I wanted my life situation to look like on a day in and day out basis. So, this bout of burnout really helped me to start looking around and asking myself questions about what I really wanted to be doing every single day. And I ultimately decided that I needed to leave this corporate structure. I reached that goal that I set for myself with that title. I was seeing that it didn't really mean what I thought it was going to mean. It didn't bring me a sense of accomplishment. And with the whole pandemic situation on top of it, I was just done. So, what I learned from this bout of burnout is that working an unaligned job is one of the fastest ways to reach burnout. And it could be unaligned in subject matter, it could be unaligned in terms of corporate culture, it could be unaligned in terms of just your team, it could be unaligned in terms of the work, the hours. I mean, any one or more of those situations could cause burnout. And so that's what I learned from my bout of 2020 burnout. And I said, okay, great. This is unaligned burnout. I'm leaving my job and I'm going to do something that I believe is more aligned. So from there, I started my own business. And in many senses, this was so much more aligned. I feel as an entrepreneur, so much more excited about what I'm doing. I have a greater sense of ownership for what I'm doing. And in turn, I have a greater sense of care and energy around what I'm doing because, and if you're a business owner, you'll know, I would give everything I have to make this work. And so, the end of 2020 into 2021, I spent really laser focused on building a business. Mind you, a lot of people would say that's a crazy ass time to leave a job, right? Like, let's just jump into the unknown. Let's take the leap in the middle of a pandemic and start your own business. I say, yeah, girl, sign me up. I want to do that. And I did. And right away, it was great. I had so much adrenaline and I was just high on life. And based off the fact that, like, I could create my own hours, I could work from wherever I wanted, it just felt like a greater level of freedom. But when the adrenaline wore off and I found myself working nonstop, I approached another bout of burnout. And this one really kind of threw me for a loop because I really wanted to figure out why, right? Like I thought I'd made this huge change, I had taken a leap. Surely I couldn't burn out as an entrepreneur. That's what I thought at the time. And I was wrong. And in reflecting on what led up to this bout of burnout, I think it was really that while I had left the corporate structure, I had brought with me all of the experiences and ideas I had around systems and process and what it meant to be working and what my business as an entrepreneur should look like. I started to model my business based off of the exact model that I chose to leave. And as such, I knew enough to know that model didn't work for me. But until I realized that I was trying to then recreate the same model, I was just totally in the dark. I'm like, what? How could I possibly be burnt out again? Well, I was literally recreating a mini model of the burnout situation that I had just experienced. So, what I learned from this was that even though I had taken steps to be living more in alignment with what I truly desired, I had more lifestyle freedom. I had daily, I could create my days. And for me, that was so beautiful. But I was burning out because I was trying to hold on to all of these old paradigms that I knew did not serve me. So this is a sneaky one. This is a sneaky one. And I think that having this awareness, I've definitely been able to deprogram a bit more and be a little less burnt out. But I think the lesson here is just looking at how you can create systems and containers and structures that feel supportive, that feel loving, that feel like they support you enough so that you can get done what it is that you want to do, but they're not constrictive. It's like finding that fine line in between those two. So, in my mind, those were examples of unaligned burnout. And in 2022, I thought that I had beat burnout because what I ended up doing was making even a larger lifestyle change coming out of 2021, where I said, you know what? As much as I love this business I've built, I think it needs to be even more different from what I was doing in the corporate structure than I thought. So from a subject matter expertise, I spent 12 years in social media marketing in the corporate structure. Then I left and I spent a year and a half, 2 years building a consultancy in social media marketing as an entrepreneur. Great, awesome. But what I realized in 2022 was that I actually wanted to bring my business closer to some of my passions. When I look at the things that bring me the most joy in an attempt to avoid burnout, travel is the first thing that always comes to mind. And so I had an insight around being more of a digital nomad in the sense of owning my own business was just a stepping stone. What I actually really desired was to be owning and running a business from anywhere and everywhere around the world. That became the more clarified focal point. And in 2022, I figured this is alignment. This is where I'm going. And in many senses, that was true. But this is where I learned about something that I like to call aligned burnout. So let's dig into that. In 2022, I decided to give the digital nomad lifestyle a real true test. And so I moved to London for the summer of 2022. I had the absolute best time. I woke up every single day in London and fucking loved my life. It's a city that just makes me feel really alive, really creative, really inspired, and really energized without feeling overly stimulated, if that makes sense. And I thought, okay, great. Burnout, it's never going to happen to me again. But what I did when I was in London is I wanted to try out all of the different neighborhoods because, similar to New York City or even LA, there are a lot of different districts or boroughs, and each one of them has its own flavor. And so I figured that for my first time in London, I really wanted to move around a lot and try out a lot of different living situations and experience all the different kind of pockets of this very, very large city to see and fine tune where I would like to go and specifically stay the next time I go back. And so, what this looked like for me over the course of 3 months was moving and living in 12 different living situations. 12 in 3 months. Essentially, once a week, I was moving. And it wasn't like I was just like on vacation and moving hotels, right? It was like I was fully in business, working, and while exploring this brand new city, and then moving once a week on top of that. And so, just when I started to kind of get a feel for a neighborhood and figure out the coffee shop that I preferred and the grocery store, or they don't really have grocery stores, but like the market that I liked best, or found like a really great neighborhood restaurant spot, it would be time to move. And I didn't realize how much this would wear on me. And so when I got back to the US after my summer in London, I crashed hard. So hard. In fact, I think that was one of the more extreme bouts of burnout that I had ever experienced. And so that was a wild realization because it's like, well, what was I doing? I was living my best life. And, I came home at the end of Leo season. So, like, there was maybe a little too much fire going on. There was just, it was just too much of everything. And I completely crashed when I got back. And that's when I learned that you can have aligned burnout. So, even if and even when you're doing something that you truly love, if you run yourself too hard, you will crash. And so from there, I recognized that in order for me to feel supported as a digital nomad, I actually need to travel much slower. Slower in the sense of even, I wasn't hopping cities or countries. Like I was in London the entire time, but even slower in the sense of where I was living. So had I had one Airbnb for like those 3 months consistently, or maybe I had, two separate living situations or whatever it may be, any number less than 12 would have been a much better bet for me to avoid that burnout. This is something that I think is important to be aware of because if you feel like even if you're in the right place with the right people at the right time, it's possible to still push yourself too far. And I think the important thing here is to say, like, not like, God, like, what's wrong with me? Like, because that was my first reaction, right? It was like, what on earth is wrong with me? How can I burn out when I'm doing something that I want to be doing? How can I burn out when I'm doing something that I love? How could this be? What's wrong with me? And I think that question, it's like that pressure when you tell yourself there has to be something wrong because you feel XYZ, that just makes it so much worse. It makes it so much worse. And there's nothing wrong. This is all just learning lessons, it's information. And the more awareness we can bring to how we feel and what's causing us to feel certain ways, the better we can get at actually adjusting and constantly readjusting and tweaking to get to a place where maybe burnout doesn't disappear, but it feels manageable. Maybe it's recovery over a long weekend versus 3 months, right? Experiencing this aligned burnout helped me to really see and understand that there's nothing wrong. So even when you are on the right track, you might still feel this way. And, you don't have to beat yourself up over it. And you don't have to scrap the whole plan because you could still be on the right track and just need a little bit of tweaking. So now we're in 2023. We're 3 months into 2023, and I just spent 3 weeks in 3 different cities in California. And having just learned this lesson last summer in London, I knew this was going to be a problem. But I spent 1 week in LA, I spent 1 week in Laguna Beach, and then I spent 1 week in Palm Springs. I had the option to then spend 1 week in Encinitas, to which I actually declined that opportunity because I realized that I was already on the track for another little bout of burnout. And that's what brings us here today. So, while I was aware that this may very well happen at the end of my trip, I still did it. So, some of us need to learn our lessons more than once. Love that for me. But the silver lining on this is that I knew myself enough to say no to that 4th week in a 4th location. As much as I wanted to be there, I knew that I wouldn't have had the right amount of energy to be there. It was a business retreat. And had I shown up to that business retreat totally fucking burnt out like I am today, I wouldn't have been able to receive that experience. And I wouldn't have had as much to give to that experience. So while it's frustrating that I'm feeling this way and that we're talking about burnout today, it is comforting to see that, okay, I have this new level of information, and based off of this new level of information, I can make a choice that's more aligned to supporting myself. Now, did we go too far still? Yes, more is more. However, it could have been worse. It could have been worse. And so those are some of the experiences that I've had. It seems like once a year, right? It's like burning out once a year, sometimes for unaligned situations and sometimes based off of even aligned situations. This constant learning journey has taught me that sooner or later, we're going to burn out. Some people burn out sooner than others, but eventually, I do believe that based off of the way that we live our lives today, burnout is inevitable. So, how do we live with burnout and continue to learn from it and take care of ourselves enough to ideally minimize it more and more moving forward. I think the first way to do so is really by having this shift in perspective. If we are accepting that burnout is part of life, then we're actually giving ourselves some grace and some permission. The idea that we should not be experiencing burnout actually perpetuates burnout. So, having that perspective shift and being able to say, I accept burnout as part of my life, helps us then to bounce back from these bouts of burnout. I think another thing to look at is work life balance or work life integration, because again, especially if you're an entrepreneur, work is not separate from your life. And so having this awareness as well is super helpful to help us understand how we keep getting here and perhaps what we can be looking at in terms of creating intentional moments that are not related to work in order to slow the roll on this burnout. Boundaries is something that I talk a lot about. And I think that setting appropriate boundaries is definitely helpful for managing burnout. And this could be boundaries around your use of social media. This could be boundaries around how much time you spend watching Netflix. This could be boundaries around who you spend time with, you know, surrounding yourself with people that don't drain your energy. This could be boundaries around just saying no, taking on less in your daily work. But once you feel like you've set appropriate boundaries, it's probably a good idea to set a few more. I don't think I've ever met anyone who's had too many boundaries. You know what I mean? We could all probably set a few more boundaries. Next, I think looking at your daily routine and your self-care practices is a really great area to concentrate on when we're feeling burnt out or when we're trying to minimize burnout. The first thing that I like to do and that I have been doing is sleeping more. Okay. I'm feeling completely frazzled. I'm going to sleep until 9 instead of 8. But just looking for those moments of getting more rest, I think that rest and sleep in general are probably highly correlated to a sense of burnout, especially if you think about being stressed out or overworked. The first thing to typically get cut from that scenario is sleep. So, sleeping more, also doing less. I have a really hard time with doing less. And so I'm fully aware that this is probably a contributing factor to my burnout. But truly doing less, I think as a society, we glorify doing more and doing the most all the fucking time. And I think that's a lot of how we've all collectively gotten to this point. We're plugged in 24/7 to technology, to communication. If I think about how many moments throughout the day that I'm doing nothing, like I don't know that I can count them on a finger. For example, I was on a flight earlier this week and Delta now offers free Wi Fi for the entirety of your flight. And I was like, that's amazing. I can do X and I can do Y and I can do Z. So instead of just enjoying my time in the air, having an air sign moment, I worked. it could have been beneficial had I done less on that flight. But doing less in general, I think that's an area that we can all look to in terms of minimizing burnout. The next one in terms of daily routine is just nourishing yourself, nourishing your body, your mind, hydrating, drinking water, eating healthy food, moving your body, exercise, all of these basic fundamental self-care things are definitely going to help when we're either feeling burnt out or when we're trying to minimize our burnout. This next one is something that I lose sight of quite often, but I think it's so important, which is having fun. I remember I had a really good friend of mine in the thick of my 2021 burnout when I was working 24/7 ask me what I did for fun. And that question just totally silenced me. Like I had no response. I couldn't think of one thing that I had done that had been fun or that had felt fun because I was working 24/7. And having fun is a critical component of life. Like if we're not having fun while we're here, like what are we doing this all for? What are we burning ourselves out over? So having fun, taking moments throughout the day or throughout your week or the month where you're doing something that just for the fun of it. And I think this is tricky too when you do have a very integrated work lifestyle. Carving out moments of fun that are not connected to work in any way is the best way to do this and can also be really hard when you just have a very integrated life. But having fun, let's not forget that. The next two are actually goals of mine. And so I'm hypothesizing that these will reduce burnout, minimize burnout, help to manage burnout. And I can't say that I know for sure, but I will report back because these are goals of mine that I think I've got to get pretty serious about. The first one is taking breaks. And for me, when I say taking breaks, I think of taking vacations. It's one thing to be traveling, and it's a completely different thing to be on vacation. A vacation implies no work. So, a travel review for the podcast is not a vacation. So, my goal, I think, is to take a vacation this year. If I'm being 100% honest with you, I haven't taken a vacation since I left the corporate structure. So in the last 3 years, I have not taken a vacation. And, vacations don't have to be long. It could be 3 days, 4 days, or it could be 3 weeks. But a vacation with no work, I hypothesize, helps with burnout. I'll report back. I'll let you know how that goes. But if you're someone who also hasn't taken a vacation, just think about what that could do for us, right? We deserve vacation. And the next one that is also a goal of mine for this year is to ask for help. I don't know about you, but I am terrible at asking for help. In fact, I don't ask for help at all, ever. I've had a lot of life experiences that have led me to believe that I can do everything by myself, and sometimes it's better that way. And at the same time, I know that you can only go so far alone, can only scale a business so high alone. At some point, you're going to have to ask for help. And asking for help could be outsourcing, it could be delegating, it could be hiring, it could be asking a friend or family member for a favor. But I would assume that asking for help actually helps to minimize and manage burnout. Again, guys, like I haven't done this yet. This is honesty hour. For me, taking vacations, taking breaks, and asking for help are the next logical steps to living in a way that's more manageable, that's more supportive, that's more restful, and that allows me to do my best work without burning out every single year. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. But I think, again, I think it's part of reality. And so let's continue to learn the lessons that burnout is teaching us and minimize the overall impact. So that's a word on burnout. This is a very meta moment. I hope that you found this helpful in some way, even if it's just realizing that you're not the only one that experiences burnout. And really shifting that perspective to not blaming yourself, asking what's wrong with you the next time you feel this way, but rather shifting the perspective to what can I learn from this and how can I live with this, and looking for ways to continually support yourself so that when we do hit burnout, it's just less of a doozy. Let's transition into this week's Love It or Leave It. What I am loving this week, I just read Paris Hilton's memoir. It's a brand new book. It came out a week ago. I read this book in 1 week, finished it, cover to cover. And that's a big deal because I'm not a fast reader, but this book, so easy to read. Paris Hilton for me is somebody who has always been very inspiring. I view her as a true trailblazer. I think she is 10 years ahead of her time at all times. She's really plugged into technology, entrepreneurship. She creates culture. And so I find her incredibly fascinating. And reading this memoir was really eye-opening. At times, it was really hard to read, and the amount of abuse that she has survived is truly shocking. And I really appreciated her sharing her story because it just debunks any preconceived notion you'd ever have about her. I also think it's a fascinating study in pop culture and media and still some of the narratives that women specifically face in the media. And while the book is pretty heavy a lot of the time, it's still like fully Paris. Like you'll be laughing, you'll be crying. And I just absolutely loved it. I also learned that her big three, so we obviously know she's an Aquarius sun. Aquarius sisters, loves it. But she's a Leo moon and a Sag rising. I'm like, I don't think I could create a better top three, big three. Like, I love Sag energy. Also, Leo, opposite sign of Aquarius, very interesting. But having all of that fire and all of that air is just such a fun combination. And I love that she actually addresses this pretty early in the book because, in true Aquarian fashion, like technology is just part of who we are as people. And while she didn't go like full astrology teacher in this book, like that definitely wasn't the point. For somebody who is familiar with or aware of astrology, it just subtly helped connect a lot of dots. And you can tell that she truly believes that she was born at the perfect time, in the perfect age to be doing exactly what she's doing. And I think that's true of everyone. I love this book. Like I said, it's hard to read at times, but it's a truly fascinating look behind the scenes. And I think it helps you understand a lot more about why she does what she does. One of my favorites, so at the end of the book, she has some takeaways in terms of advice for entrepreneurs. And one of the ones that I was like, hell yeah. I mean, I love them all, but one of the ones I'll share with you that really resonated with me is don't waste energy living a life someone else designed for you. Life is one per customer. You do you, and I do me. And that is truly the motto, right? Like, you live your life, I live mine, and don't live your life based off of what someone else thinks you should be doing. You only have one. Make of it what you want. And for me, that perfectly aligns to the More Pod motto, right? I share the things that make me more me, and maybe you can discover a thing or two that will make you more you. So, highly recommend this book. Again, I can't believe I finished it in a week. It sounds so wild, but it's like, it was that good. Okay. Loves it. What I'm leaving behind this week is jet lag. Um, I was in the Pacific time zone for most of March, and I have this really funny thing about the Pacific time zone where I feel like I'm just chronically behind in life when I am kicking it in the Pacific time zone. And technically, this is actually true. I mean, I went down a rabbit hole this morning of looking at time zones. I'm like, what would be my ideal time zone? What is true time? And mind you, I realize that time is a construct, like it's not even real. But we have all collectively, as humans, agreed to time. And so, coordinated universal time is basically the zero clock. And then when you veer off of that time, and that time zone runs like right through the UK. So, like, pick the UK and then run that all the way south. Anything there is coordinated universal time, okay? And then you plus or you minus hours based on where you go in the world. I'm like explaining to you how time works. But being in Pacific time is one of the things that I've realized it seems so trivial, but I actually dislike it the most. Like, being in Pacific time, you are so many hours behind the world time clock. And when you look about the US, it's like you couldn't go any further behind Pacific time zone than like Hawaii. And realistically, how many people actually live in Hawaii compared to the rest of the United States? My point here is simply that as someone who likes to be ahead in life, like generally ahead in terms of my day, like I like to live a little bit in the future. Pacific time zone doesn't work for me, but coming back from Pacific time zone also doesn't work for me because I have been so fucking jet lagged that I cannot fall asleep till at least 2 o'clock in the morning every morning. And it's not helping the burnout. It's not helping the burnout. So I'm leaving behind jet lag this week and being chronically behind in time zones. I don't like that for me. I'd much rather be a few hours, if not half a day ahead of the rest of the world. It just feels better, like I'm set up for success. No one can bother you in the morning because when it's morning for you, say you're in London, everyone else is still sleeping in the US. Anyways, I'm rambling now about time zones, but we're leaving jet lag and Pacific time behind. We're loving the Paris Hilton memoir, and we are going to find ways to manage this burnout. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me and with the podcast every single week. When I hear that you listen to the podcast, it's truly become a love language of mine. It makes me so happy. So thank you so much. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a rating, a 5-star rating, leave a review. It helps to grow the show. It helps other people discover the show. And it gives people a good idea of what they can expect if they join the More Pod fam. That's all I've got. Thank you so much. Have a great week and fuck burnout. Bye. Listen to the More Pod every Wednesday as I share the things that make me more me and discover a thing or two to make you more you.